Hey guys, we're going to wrap up chapter 7, looking at how we can protect biodiversity. Going back in 7.1, 7.2, we learned about the importance of biodiversity and things like, a lot of plants provide beneficial medicines for us. We learned about the threats to biodiversity, like invasive species and habitat loss. So now what we're going to do is look at how, now that we know that how important it is to have local ecosystems have this biodiversity and why it's essential not only for the life of the planet, but for you and I and the rest of the human race. We're going to talk about ways that we can protect it. So taking a look at that quote there, and if you really let it sink in and think about it, that half of the world's plants and almost half of the animals that have backbones live on only 2% of the land on Earth. And to give you an idea, that is not a lot at all. So that's why it's very important we protect these areas, because there's not many areas on Earth where these organisms can or will survive. So the first thing we're going to go through is just some laws. In this case, this is the law in the United States, the Endangered Species Act. I'm sure you've heard about it before, but it was established in 1973, and just like the cartoon shows, it's kind of this safety net. We've recognized which animals are endangered or threatened or near threatened and so on, and it's a way to call to action or prevent these organisms from going extinct. And there's these three major parts. So the first thing, you cannot harm the species itself or the habitats. Perfect example, in Las Vegas in the Mojave Desert, the desert tortoise is considered threatened. So any habitat that the desert tortoise lives on cannot be harmed. The other thing, and we're going to see this internationally as well, is you cannot trade products from these species. Again, like shark fins or elephant tusks. And finally, what happens is we have a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. What they will do, they are there to keep a list, to make counts and see what's going on. Is the Endangered Species Act doing what it's supposed to do in keeping people accountable? And the good thing is there's animals that have been taken off because we've been keeping these lists. We can remove animals like the bald eagle, or we can keep an eye on things in regards to some organisms that we've had to add, unfortunately. But the good thing is now we've recognized them and we can save them. And what they'll do is they'll kind of move them either to the left or to the right. And hopefully with the Endangered Species Act, you can move more towards the right. In this picture, if you're going to the left, you're getting closer and closer to extinct. So the whole goal is to remove these organisms, these plants and animals, from threatened and get them to the least concerned. So like I mentioned, internationally as well, there's some laws, countries working together. And in 1975, just 2 years after the Endangered Species Act, internationally, they've decided to ban trade like tusks and things like that, which is very important. And then the convention in 1992, what that did is it kind of created a watchdog for all the other countries. It held everyone accountable. If one country is doing something that's disrupting the biodiversity or harming an endangered or threatened species in their country, other countries can come in and say, hey, what you're doing isn't good, holds them accountable, and helps them to restore and reverse that destruction of the biodiversity. Then what we can also do is we can go more hands-on with the specific animals that are threatened, like in this case, the elephant or the giraffe or the panda, which we'll see in a second. And what we can do is, one is we can captive breeding. So it's exactly what it sounds like. We have these animals in captivity. We make sure that everything is necessary that they need in order for them to breed. And you usually see this in zoos where there's zoologists and biologists working together to help these animals, the numbers of these animals increase. There's also this species survival plan, and this includes not only breeding them, but also educating the public, doing research on how and why these animals may or may be becoming endangered, and how to make their lives better in the wild. And then finally, this is kind of a last-ditch effort, and we don't see this a whole lot, but what we can do is cloning, where you're taking DNA from the endangered species and putting into another animal that's very closely related in the hopes of just keeping that animal's DNA at least within the breeding pool. And here's just an example of the captive breeding program. Pandas are very finicky when it comes to breeding, and they won't breed unless conditions are perfect. So it's been very difficult with the panda, but through this captive breeding program, they've been able to increase panda production or panda population. All right, what's a hotspot? A hotspot's an area on Earth where there's a large number of species, and we have to protect them for quite a few reasons. Because one is there's 1,500 plants found nowhere else in the world in these hotspots. So that means is once those hotspots or those areas are destroyed or gone or fragmented, unfortunately, so are those species as well. Unfortunately, because of human activity, habitat loss, taking land and transforming it to farming, building roads, development, things like that, we've already lost 70% of this habitat. And unfortunately, and think of that quote at the beginning, remember 50% of Earth's plant species and their vertebrates, the vertebrates, 42% of them only live on 2% of the Earth. And that's where we get that number 34. There's 34 hotspots. This gives you an idea of where they are. So these are areas of concern where we have organisms that only are in those areas, and if those areas are disturbed or any further, that we have a chance of losing these organisms. The other thing is looking at money. We all know when we see areas like habitat destruction due to farming or even development, the reason people are doing it is because there's a profit involved. Wipe out a forest, put up a housing development, people can make money. So the goal is to do the opposite, similar to ecotourism, which we talked about in another lecture. What we can do today is we'll provide people with money to not disrupt their land. And there's two ways they can do that. You can do this debt for nature. Most countries have debt that they have to pay off. And, when a country has debt, they need to make money, like I said, and then it usually involves destroying the land. In this case, you have conservation organizations. What they will do is they'll say, hey, we'll give you money not to disrupt your land. So again, the point was to lose debt. The country doesn't have to destroy their ecosystems, and everybody wins. The other one is concession. Through concession, what they're doing is they're buying the area. So there's this area of land that may be used for development or farming. Here, a conservation organization has raised money, and they figure out how much money would have been gained from farming that land or developing that land. And they say, hey, here's the money you would have made destroying the land. Now we'll take it and we'll leave it be so these animals can survive. And this is a lot of this is going on, which is good in the Latin American countries, because as we learned, most of Earth's biodiversity is closest to the equator. So there's a lot of countries now, especially in Latin America, where they are receiving money to not disrupt these rainforests and natural habitats. Lastly, we have our roads, we have our developments, and we all know humans and animals are coming in more and more closer contact with each other as urban sprawl takes place. So what we can do is we can at least limit our impact through wildlife corridors. So just like what a corridor is, it's like a hallway, and you can see this in the picture. And the sign there says an animal bridge, and you've all been driving before, and maybe it's an elk or a deer wants to get from one side of the road to the other, and we've all seen or know that sometimes doesn't end well. So within wildlife corridor, what we can do is we can take these areas and we can bridge them together. Because what that allows organisms to do, because you have to imagine maybe there was a population of elk on this side of the road that never was able to interbreed with elk on this side of the road. And what starts to happen is you start to see inbreeding going on and genetic diversity lessening, which is not good for the species, and usually disease increases and the population goes down. Thankfully, with wildlife corridors, we can allow these populations to interact or even migrate, and the population doesn't decrease and genetic diversity remains stable. Here's something pretty cool. It's called the Western Wildway, but what they're actually doing, and the little kind of shaded reds here, and these are where they're trying to build or have built corridors. The green is protected lands, like here you can see the Grand Canyon or the Tetons. These are protected areas, but you can see the khaki or the brown are areas where probably human development is, or roads and things like that. So the goal is to allow, especially migrating animals, give them areas where they can be safe to travel north and south with the limited human interaction. So they're protected, humans are away from the animals, and again, everybody wins, with the whole goal is protecting biodiversity. So that does it. If you guys have any questions, always shoot me an email or ask me in class, and we'll see you later.